A billionaire stood tall in court, accusing his maid of a crime she never committed. With wealth, lawyers, and power on his side, it seemed he had already won. But then the silence broke. His young daughter opened her mouth. And in that moment, her words shattered lies, silenced arrogance, and turned the entire courtroom upside down. What she said will shock you, so make sure to subscribe. The courtroom felt more like a battlefield than a place of justice. The air was heavy, thick with whispers and judgmental stares. The polished floor reflected the light from tall, grand windows, but no brightness seemed to touch the atmosphere inside. It was as though truth itself had been chained down beneath the weight of wealth and power. On the left, Richard Harrow sat in confidence. He was not just a billionaire, he was a man who believed money could bend reality, a man who thought every problem could be solved with a signature on a check. His suit, crisp and expensive, was a silent statement of superiority. His lawyers surrounded him, their briefcases packed with carefully constructed lies, ready to dismantle the reputation of a woman who had spent her life in service. On the right, Grace sat quietly. She wore a plain, neatly pressed maid's uniform. Her posture was straight, but her trembling fingers intertwined nervously in her lap. She had no lawyers with endless resources, no army of voices to fight for her. All she had was her truth, her faith, and the deep love she carried for a little girl she was accused of harming. Grace's eyes shifted toward Emily, the child at the center of this storm. Emily's small hands clutched her dress tightly, her shoulders tense under the watchful eye of her father. For a fleeting moment, their eyes met. Grace's gaze softened, her lips curving into the faintest smile. It was a silent promise, a plea for courage. "Hold on, little one. The truth will find its voice." The prosecution began. Richard's lawyers spoke with rehearsed passion, their words painting Grace as cruel, heartless, and violent. They used staged photographs, carefully crafted testimonies, and exaggerated tales to build their case. Each accusation struck Grace like a blow, but she remained still. Her heart thundered in her chest, but she held her head high. Whispers rippled through the courtroom. Some believed the billionaire instantly. After all, why would a man of such status need to lie? Others looked uneasy, as though sensing the imbalance of power unfolding before them. Grace swallowed hard. She could feel the weight of the world pressing on her shoulders. She whispered a prayer beneath her breath, not for her own freedom, but for Emily's courage. Finally, the judge's stern voice cut through the noise. "Grace, do you have anything to say for yourself?" The maid rose slowly. Her legs trembled, but her spirit held firm. She took a deep breath and spoke, her words trembling at first, but growing with strength. "I have cared for Emily not as a servant, but as a mother would. I have fed her, comforted her, held her when she cried. Never in my life have I lifted a hand against her. And while the world may doubt me because I wear this uniform and not a suit, I know one thing: truth may bend, but it never breaks. And today it will be heard." The room grew restless. Some scoffed, others leaned in closer. Richard leaned back in his chair, his smirk wide, convinced that silence from his daughter would guarantee victory. But he underestimated the courage of innocence. For when Emily finally opened her mouth, her words would shake the very foundation of that courtroom. The courtroom fell into an uneasy silence after Grace's words. For a moment, it seemed as though time itself had paused, waiting for what would happen next. Richard Harrow shifted in his seat, adjusting his gold cufflinks as though the weight of his wealth alone could crush any opposition. His smirk remained, but a flicker of irritation crossed his eyes. He leaned toward his lead attorney and whispered, "And this quickly. I don't want her wasting any more of the court's time." The attorney nodded, rising with theatrical confidence. He circled Grace like a predator studying its prey. "You speak of love and care, Ms. Grace," he said, his voice dripping with mockery. "But what does love mean when we have witnesses? When we have bruises? When we have the testimony of a child?" The lawyer slammed down a folder of photographs on the judge's desk. Grainy, carefully angled photos showed Emily with faint marks on her arm. Gasps echoed through the room. Grace's heart clenched. She knew those marks weren't from her. Emily had been a spirited child, often climbing trees, sometimes tumbling on the marble stairs of the mansion. But in the hands of powerful lawyers, innocent bruises became weapons of destruction. Grace whispered again in her heart, "Stay strong. The truth is alive. It will breathe." The judge raised his brows. "These are serious claims. Unless proven false, this evidence weighs heavily against you." Richard's smile widened. The billionaire sat back, confident victory was near. Money had always protected him. In business, in society, in his private life, it shielded him like armor. Why should today be any different? But just then, a quiet voice pierced the tension. "Your Honor." Every head turned. Emily's small frame looked even smaller against the towering wooden witness stand. She hadn't spoken yet, hadn't dared to go against her father's towering shadow. But now her lips parted, and the world seemed to hold its breath. The judge gestured gently. "Emily, do you wish to speak?" Emily glanced at her father. His cold, commanding stare bore into her like steel. Her hands trembled. Her throat tightened. For a second, she almost pulled back, almost surrendered to fear, but then her eyes found Grace. The maid's face radiated a warmth that no lie could erase. Grace didn't speak, but her eyes told 1,000 words. "It's okay. You are safe. Tell the truth." Emily's lips quivered. Then, with a shaky breath, she spoke. "My father is lying." The words landed like a thunderclap. Gasps filled the courtroom. Richard bolted upright, his face twisting in fury. "Emily!" he barked, his voice echoing across the chamber. "Enough! Sit down!" But it was too late. The truth had been unleashed. Tears welled in Emily's eyes, but she continued. "Grace never hurt me, not once. She took care of me when my father wasn't there. She read me bedtime stories, made me soup when I was sick, and hugged me when I was scared. She's the only one who ever made me feel loved." Silence, heavy, unshakable. The jury shifted uncomfortably. The judge's stern expression softened. And Richard, the man who thought he could buy silence, was suddenly powerless against the trembling voice of his own daughter. Grace's chest tightened. She bowed her head, whispering a prayer of gratitude, for in that moment, innocence had spoken louder than wealth. The moment Emily's words struck the air, the courtroom transformed. The whispers grew louder, people leaned forward, and even the judge's gavel had to strike twice to restore order. Richard's face burned red with fury. He slammed his palm on the table. "She's a child. She doesn't know what she's saying. She's confused, manipulated by this woman." His finger jabbed toward Grace as though his accusation alone could erase the truth. But Emily didn't shrink back. Tears streamed down her cheeks, yet her voice, though trembling, carried courage. "I'm not confused," she whispered. Then louder, "I'm not confused." The silence that followed was deafening. Every eye in the room was on her, this small girl daring to challenge a man who owned skyscrapers, businesses, and influence. Grace felt her own tears sting, but she held them back. She needed to remain strong, for Emily, the lawyer, desperate to regain control, adjusted his tie and pressed on. "Emily, perhaps you misremember. Children often—" Emily cut him off. "I remember everything. My father yelled at me when I cried. He told me never to speak of it. But Grace, she held me when no one else did. If anyone should be punished here, it's not her." The room gasped again. Richard lunged forward, his voice booming. "Enough! You will not humiliate me like this in front of strangers." The judge's gavel slammed down with thunderous authority. "Mr. Harrow, sit down. You are out of order." For the first time, the mask of untouchable power cracked. Richard's confidence faltered. He slowly sank into his chair, his jaw clenched, but his eyes darted nervously. Emily, her chest rising and falling quickly, finally exhaled. She had spoken the truth, and though fear still lingered, she felt something stronger now, freedom. Grace whispered softly, "That's my brave girl." But the trial was not yet over. Richard's lawyers scrambled, stacking papers, whispering furiously, trying to spin lies to regain their grip. They introduced witnesses, paid servants, associates loyal to Richard, each one delivering rehearsed lines against Grace. She was strict. She seemed bitter. She might have snapped. Their testimonies painted shadows, but they could not erase the light of Emily's words. The jury's eyes no longer trusted so easily. Doubt had entered the cracks of Richard's empire. Then came Grace's turn to testify fully. She rose, her steps slow, steady, almost fragile. But when she stood at the witness stand, her voice carried a quiet strength. "I was raised to believe that kindness is not weakness, and that truth needs no wealth to defend itself. I came into that house to earn an honest living, to care for a little girl who needed more than money could give. And I will say this again, I have never and would never harm her. Not even in anger, not even in desperation. Because love, real love, cannot raise a hand to hurt." Her words did not roar like thunder, but they spread through the room like a calm fire, steady and undeniable. Even those who had doubted her found themselves moved. Emily reached out from her seat, her small fingers brushing against Grace's arm. That simple gesture, a child choosing to love over fear, spoke louder than any argument made that day. Richard looked around the courtroom, but for the first time, no one seemed to be on his side. His money, his lawyers, his power, it all seemed to shrink under the weight of truth. The tide was turning. The courtroom was no longer Richard Harrow's stage. For years he had commanded rooms with nothing but his presence, his money-buying silence and obedience. But now, in this room, every eye was shifting. People no longer looked at him with admiration. They looked with doubt, suspicion, and even disgust. Richard's jaw tightened. He could feel control slipping, and that terrified him more than losing money. Power was his oxygen, and now he was gasping for air. The judge called for a recess. Lawyers shuffled papers, the audience whispered, and Richard stormed out, his expensive shoes striking the marble floor like war drums. He cornered Emily near the hallway. His shadow towered over her. "How dare you humiliate me like this?" His voice was low, venomous. Emily flinched, but she did not back down. "I told the truth, Father." His hand hovered in the air for a moment, trembling with rage. But then he froze. Too many eyes were watching. He lowered his hand, straightened his tie, and hissed, "You'll regret this, Emily. You think this maid can save you? She'll be gone by tomorrow, and you'll still be mine." Emily's small frame shook, but inside her, something shifted. For the first time, she saw her father not as a giant, but as a man whose power was built on fear, and fear, once broken, could never rule her again. Back in the courtroom, Grace noticed Emily's pale face and trembling hands. She knelt beside her. "He can't hurt the truth," she whispered, "and as long as you hold on to it, you're stronger than him." The session resumed. Richard's lawyers tried one last desperate push. They argued about influence, about how Grace had manipulated the girl, twisting her against her own father. They painted Grace as a cunning woman who used kindness as a mask, but as they spoke, their arguments felt hollow. Their words fell like stones into a river of doubt. Finally, the judge asked Emily once more, "Child, do you stand by your testimony? Do you claim without hesitation that this woman never harmed you?" Emily stood. Her knees shook, but her voice, though small, was clear. "Yes, I stand by it. Grace is the only person who has ever loved me." The courtroom fell silent again. No script, no rehearsed speech, just the raw power of truth spoken from a child's heart. Grace's eyes welled, but she refused to let the tears fall. She wanted Emily to see strength, to see what courage looked like when it refused to bow. The judge turned toward Richard. "Mr. Harrow, your daughter's words contradict your claims. Unless you have substantial proof, this case leans heavily against you." Richard shot up desperate, his voice cracking with a rage born of fear. "Proof? I am proof. My word should be enough. Do you know who I am?" And in that moment, his words sealed his fate. The jury didn't see a powerful billionaire anymore. They saw a man clinging to arrogance, a father willing to destroy an innocent woman for pride. Grace closed her eyes, whispering another prayer, not for victory, but for freedom, for Emily. Because she knew when the verdict came, it wouldn't just decide her fate. It would decide whether truth could still stand tall in a world built on lies. The courtroom held its breath as the trial reached its critical stage. Every whispered conversation stopped. Every phone clicked shut. All eyes were fixed on Emily and Grace. Richard Harrow, once the picture of control and confidence, was now visibly rattled. His expensive suit could not hide the tension in his shoulders, the flicker of uncertainty in his eyes. He had built an empire where his word was law, where power silenced truth. But here, in this room, that law was crumbling. Grace sat quietly, her hands clenched under the table. She felt the familiar pangs of fear, but this time they were tempered with hope. Emily, her little girl, was about to speak, and Grace trusted her. She had nurtured her, loved her, and now the child's voice would carry the power to shatter every lie. The judge called Emily to the stand. The young girl's small frame looked almost swallowed by the grandeur of the courtroom, but her eyes glimmered with determination. She clutched her teddy bear tightly, its soft fur a shield against the storm of accusations and fear surrounding her. "Emily," the lawyer began gently, "can you tell us what happened that day?" The room went silent. The tension was so thick, it felt like a physical weight pressing down on every witness, juror, and spectator. Emily's voice trembled at first. "Grace didn't hurt me. She never hurt me." Her words were simple, yet they cut through the air like a sword, slicing the tension in half. Richard's smirk faltered. His face paled as the truth slowly began to pierce the armor he had built for so long. "I fell on the stairs," Emily continued, her voice gaining strength. "I was running. I hit my arm. Grace helped me. She hugged me, made me soup, and stayed with me until I fell asleep. She loves me." The courtroom erupted into murmurs. Cameras flashed, reporters scribbled furiously, and jurors shifted uncomfortably. Every word Emily spoke dismantled the carefully constructed narrative Richard had built for months. Richard's anger boiled over. "No, you don't understand. She's lying," he shouted, but the judge's gavel silenced him instantly. Emily turned toward her father, her small voice steady despite the quiver of emotion. "Daddy, why are you lying? Grace is my family. She's always been there for me. You weren't." Richard's fists clenched. For the first time, he was powerless, not because the law or the jury had won, but because love, honesty, and courage had spoken louder than any money or influence could. Grace's tears fell freely now, not tears of fear, but of relief, gratitude, and deep emotional release. She held Emily's gaze, whispering softly, "Thank you for being brave, sweetheart. You saved us." Emily hugged her tightly, whispering back, "No, Mama Grace. You saved me first. I just told the truth." The jury leaned forward, captivated. The prosecutor and Richard's lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. The judge, stoic as ever, allowed the power of the child's testimony to speak for itself. In that room, one undeniable truth had risen above wealth, lies, and fear. Grace's innocence, proven by the pure, unwavering love of the little girl she had raised like her own. The stage was set. The verdict, when it came, would not just be about a maid, a billionaire, or a child. It would be about truth prevailing where injustice had tried to reign, and the world waited, hearts pounding, for justice to finally be heard. The courtroom was tense, every person on edge, waiting for the moment that would decide everything. Grace sat quietly, her hands still trembling, but her heart held a fragile hope. Emily's words had cut through the lies, but the jury's decision would seal her fate. The foreman, a middle-aged woman with gentle eyes, stood and held the verdict slip in her hands. The silence in the room was deafening. Every eye, every breath, every heartbeat seemed magnified. Richard Harrow, once the embodiment of control, sat rigid, his knuckles white as he gripped the arms of his chair. The judge cleared his throat, unfolding the paper slowly. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "Yes, Your Honor," the foreman replied. Grace's chest tightened. She whispered a quiet prayer. "Please, Lord, let the truth win." The judge read. Aloud, "We, the jury, find the defendant, Grace Johnson, not guilty on all charges." A collective gasp echoed through the courtroom. Whispers turned to murmurs and murmurs to soft applause. Tears streamed down Grace's cheeks as relief washed over her like a tidal wave. She was free, free from lies, from fear, from the shadow of injustice. The judge wasn't finished. His voice rang clear. Furthermore, it is the judgment of this court that Mr. Richard Harrow's accusations were unfounded and malicious. The court will review charges of perjury and defamation against him. Richard froze, his face pale, then flushed red with anger and humiliation. His empire of influence, his carefully constructed lies, crumbled in the presence of truth. For the first time, he felt powerless, exposed before everyone he had sought to control. Grace lifted her face, stunned. Not only had she been cleared, but justice had shifted toward the real perpetrator of deceit. She felt the warmth of victory, not for herself alone, but for the love and trust of the child she had protected at all costs. Emily, unable to contain herself, broke free from the court officer and ran into Grace's arms. "Grace!" she cried, burying her face in her motherly figure's shoulder. Grace held her tightly. "You were so brave, sweetheart," she whispered. "No, Mama Grace, you saved me first." "I just told the truth," Emily replied softly, her innocence and courage shining through every word. The spectators, moved to tears, witnessed the extraordinary bond between the two. The jury, the lawyers, even the judge allowed themselves to feel the weight of this pure, unwavering love. Richard sat in stunned silence, powerless. Money, influence, and pride, none of it mattered. His daughter had spoken the truth, and that truth had toppled everything he tried to control. The little girl he had underestimated had given the final, undeniable judgment. Love, honesty, and loyalty were stronger than wealth, fear, and arrogance. Days later, the news spread like wildfire. Headlines declared, "Billionaire's lies exposed, Maid vindicated by daughter's brave testimony." Grace became a symbol of resilience, proof that even the powerless could rise above injustice. Yet for Grace, fame meant nothing. What mattered was home, the safety and happiness of Emily, the child who had chosen her over fear and deception. One sunny morning, Grace and Emily sat on the porch of their modest home. Emily colored in her sketchbook, occasionally glancing up at Grace with a smile that lit the room. "Do you think Daddy will ever come back?" Emily asked softly. Grace hesitated, choosing her words with care. "Maybe one day. But no matter what, you'll always have me. I'm not going anywhere." Emily leaned her head against her, whispering, "Good, because you're my forever mama, Grace." Grace smiled, her heart full. She had entered the Harlow mansion as a maid, powerless and overlooked. But she had left the courtroom as something far greater, a mother in the eyes of a child, a symbol of courage, and proof that truth and love always triumph over lies and fear. As the wind rustled through the trees, Grace whispered softly, "Truth always wins. Love always wins." And for the first time in her life, the world agreed. If one child's courage can topple a billionaire's lies, imagine what truth and love can do in your life. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more inspiring stories like this.